Well, we've been learning from First Peter, the book of First Peter, about how to prepare for hard times. So today we will look at how Peter tells us to deal with or prepare for hard times in ministry. Now, if you've been around ministry for very long, you will have figured out that there can be hard times connected to it. Ministry can have its bumps. And so this is the way Peter puts it, and this is in 1 Peter chapter 5, beginning in verse 1. I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and witness to the sufferings of Christ, as well as one who shares in the glory about to be revealed. Shepherd God's flock among you, not overseeing out of compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not out of greed for money, but eagerly, not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. In the same way, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. All of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, because God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that he may exalt you at the proper time, casting all your cares on him, because he cares about you. So Peter makes his appeal to those within the church as a church leader himself. And now for us to make sense of this, we might need to first touch on the dynamic of leadership in the church and the words that are used for that in a biblical sense. There are really three words for the person responsible for leading the church that we see in the Bible. The first most used word is elder, the second is overseer, and the third is pastor. Pastor is actually a Latin word. It's not actually a Greek word or biblical word. It's a Latin word, and what it means is shepherd. It's the Latin word for shepherd. The corresponding Greek word is used in the Bible, and that's poimen, and it means shepherd. The picture we're given is Scripture, is that the pastor is a shepherd of God's sheep. He's responsible for leading them, for feeding them, for keeping them safe from the wolves. I mean, that kind of a picture is what is portrayed. Now, in our churches, Baptist churches, we tend to prefer the term for the minister who serves the church as pastor. That tends to be what we like to call them. But in the New Testament, that's actually the least used word for the leader of the church. We have gravitated towards the one the Bible uses the least. Okay.
A term that's used more often in the Bible is the term overseer. And this is the Greek word episkopos. Which, by the way, that's the word the Episcopalians like. And that's the person charged to do seeing the things to be done by others or done right. They're the supervisor. Some translations translate that as the bishop. You don't see too many Baptist bishops. We don't tend to use that word, but that's not our
The term most used in the Bible for the leader of the church is the term elder. That's the word presbyteros, which is the word the Presbyterians like. Okay. Presbyteros. And it kind of is a carryover from Judaism. The elders were the people responsible for overseeing the synagogue. They would have an elder who was the ruler of the synagogue. Now, I fear what happens is we tend to take these terms far too technically by making them job titles. Okay, if ever you've had a job where you had a job title, you know the job title and the job description may not be the same thing. Okay, you've been in that boat. Okay, we tend to take these and use them as job titles, but in reality, what they probably is more likely are job descriptions. These are the descriptions of what the leader of the church does, and so each in their own way they describe what the pastor is supposed to do. Now, interestingly, Peter actually uses all three terms. It's the only place in the Bible this happens. He uses all three terms together in the first two verses of this chapter. all three terms together. Look again at verse 1 and 2 of 1 Peter chapter 5. He says, I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and witness to the sufferings of Christ, as well as to the one who shares in the glory about to be revealed. Shepherd God's flock among you. Shepherd, that's that word pastor. Not overseeing out of compulsion, but willingly. So right here we have all three: elder, shepherd, pastor, and overseer. And so Peter puts all of it, that the elders are to shepherd God's flock, overseeing them willingly. So rather than seeing these as separate job titles, I think the way Peter is clearly using it, and probably how we should see it in the New Testament, is that the pastor, the elder, and the overseer can be used interchangeably as terms, providing different emphasis on what contribution the leader is making to the body of Christ. Their job descriptions of what they're doing. And so these words are descriptions not only, I think, of the leader of the church, I mean, not just the pastor, but we also see them applied to the apostles. I mean, he tells them, hey, I'm an elder. John uses that term for himself. But also to Jesus himself. Jesus is referred to as the shepherd, the chief shepherd of the church. Jesus is referred to as an apostle, actually, in Hebrews. Jesus is referred to as a overseer of the church. And so we see these titles applied to Christ, not because he has a job title, but because it's describing who he is, what he does. And so these are descriptions of what the leader of the church does. Now, it's like being a shepherd. What is it like being a shepherd for God's sheep? I don't know if you've ever wondered that question. I mean, because that is the term, pastor, shepherd. What's it like? And I actually have some real video footage of what it's like to shepherd God's sheep. And so we'll just share this short little video. Doesn't have any sound. That's okay. I'm sure they are. Yes, there are days where it's really like that. And the more involved in ministry you get, the more involved in the ministry of the church, the more likely you'll face some hard times. Okay, you'll have those moments. Sheep have teeth, by the way; they do bite. If you didn't know that. Peter appeals to the elders of the church, who might be suffering as a fellow elder who has witnessed, and he has witnessed the suffering of Christ. He's saying, I've been there. I saw what Jesus went through, and I've shared in that. I was with him. So I'm appealing to you as one who has been there, who's seen it, and also one who will share in the glory of Christ when it is revealed. And this is what Peter says. Look again at verse 1, 1 Peter 5. I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and witness to the sufferings of Christ, as well as one who shares in the glory about to be revealed. He says, guys, I'm one of you. I'm an elder. I'm a leader in the church, just as you are. And I'm telling you about the suffering that I've seen firsthand. I know what Jesus did for us. And I'm one who will share in the glory to be revealed, just as you will share in the glory to be revealed. And so I'm appealing to you on this basis. On that basis, Peter is exhorting us. That means he's urging us to take the following actions or adopt the following attitudes. And that's what we're going to look at in these next few verses, so that we will be ready for the hardships of ministry. Because sometimes it hurts. Okay, and that's not just for the pastor, guys. If you serve at any level of ministry in the church, sooner or later, you'll hit a bump. You'll hit a discouraging day. You'll have someone say something to you that hurts your feelings. It happens. So Peter tells us this information. We'll pick up in verse 2, continuing with the attitudes and actions we're supposed to have. He says, shepherd God's flock among you, not overseeing out of compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not out of greed for money, but eagerly. Now, there's two attitudes that Peter, I think, specifically addresses in this verse, both of which are necessary if you want to survive in the hard times of ministry. Firstly, he tells the church leader not to serve out of compulsion, but willingly. Serve willingly. What attitude does the person serving in ministry have? You know, do they drag their feet and grumble and complain about the work? Oh, I got to go to the church and I've got to do this and I've got to do that. Or do they serve willingly? What is their attitude? Is doing their job something they do because they have to, or something they do because they want to, they're willing to, they're doing it for Jesus? And so that's the first attitude he addresses. He says, do it willingly, not grudgingly. Secondly, Peter warns the minister not to be greedy for money, but to serve eagerly. Don't just be in the work for the money. Work for the Lord, willingly, regardless of how much it may profit your wallet. Now, this is not to say ministers shouldn't be paid. In fact, Paul in his letters explains that a minister should be paid. He's very specific on that. But Peter is warning the minister not to allow money to be his motivation. Okay, now, how many of you wake up in the morning and had to go to work because you need the paycheck? Okay, we've been there. We've all had jobs like that. Well, ministry should not be that way. You don't want to just show up for the paycheck. You want to be doing it because you're willing to serve Christ. There's a difference in attitude. And to put it simply as I can, I will say this: if you're in ministry for the money, ministry is not for you. Okay? Because most of the time the money stinks. Okay, just let's be honest. I mean, there are a few mega church pastors who make millions, but most churches, don't make that much money. It's just not the nature of the beast. You can make more money doing almost anything else. You really can. Probably right in line with musicians, right? You do it because you have a passion for it, not because you're making big bucks. Furthermore, I will say the minister that is interested in making profit is likely to have it affect their judgment. Peter's giving us a good warning here for ministries. Don't be greedy. He says that we should work not out of greed for money, but eagerly. See, the minister who's always worried about making money will do their work based on what brings in the most profit. Have you ever seen churches that do things that make money rather than what's ministry? I mean, they will happen. Will you serve a poor person as quickly as you do a rich one? James has to deal with that in his letter. Will you provide a free funeral as well as you do a paying one? Money can become a conflict of interest in the life of a minister if that is the motivation for doing the work. And so Peter warns us against that. In that work, Peter also warns them not to have the wrong attitude, not to serve grudgingly or be greedy, but because they're prepared for the times, and having that right attitude will help you to be prepared for the times of trouble when they come. Because I'm going to tell you, there will be difficult days. If you're in it for the money, the day's going to come where there isn't the money. If you're in it because you have to do it, the day's going to come where you're fed up with it enough that you're not going to do it. Does that make sense? I mean, I think Peter is giving us that warning. So we should not serve grudgingly, because then when the sheep start attacking you, you'll quit. Okay. Likewise, if you're in the ministry for the money, you will come to that day where you're saying, you know what, I can make better money doing something else, and I don't have to put up with this. I'm sorry to say they actually did a poll of pastors. 50% of them said that they would get a different job if they could find one that paid. Half. They'd gladly quit tomorrow if they could just find a different job. That's pretty sad. That doesn't fit what Peter's saying. Peter's saying don't do either, because it'll cause you trouble in your ministry. Now, he goes on to give some instruction about the minister's behavior, which I think also could translate into an attitude, and that's in verse 3. He says that the minister should we should not be lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. Being the overseer of the church doesn't mean you're anointed as God's king over the flock. There is a difference there. You're not the king of those who you serve in an area of ministry. And that's true for the pastor, but it's also true for other ministry areas. It is not your personal domain that's yours. It doesn't mean that, you get to rule over it. And here we need to understand that in the church, we all serve in our capacity, in our area of ministry, under the rule of Christ. It's his church. It's his church, or it's not a church. Jesus is the only king of the church. He's the only Lord. And this can be a problem in the church. And I think people in our society feel like their lives are out of control. Anybody feel like society's out of control? Just the world's gone mad, and you'd kind of like to get control over something, just something in my life. I want to control it. Life seems uncertain. It seems chaotic. And so people start looking for things that can give them a feeling of control. They want to control something. And I suspect we see a lot of this in homeowners associations. There are those who I think serve in a homeowners association because they care about their community. But I think there are also people who sometimes serve in a homeowners association because they want to control their community. You all see the movie Over the Hedge? No? Okay. The villain is the homeowners association president. And she's out measuring people's grass with a ruler. And you've met the kind, that kind. Well, there are people who want that control. It gives them something they can control in a world that seems out of control, and so they look for places where they can have that control. And the homeowners association is one place I think they find it. But sometimes people will volunteer to serve at church for the same reason. They want their little domain, their kingdom, the area they can control, their area of the church, and you dare not change or touch their area. This is mine. That can't happen. Peter's warning us against that. We need to avoid it. Because anytime it becomes about us controlling things or about our preferences, our comfort, or our rights to run things our way, we've stopped serving Christ and started serving ourselves. And that can be a gradual slope. It can be something we don't even notice ourselves, but we start drifting into that attitude. But we're not to act like the boss. We're to lead by example. And this is what Jesus said. This is in Matthew 23, verse 11 and 12. He said, "The greatest among you will be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted." Remember Jesus. He's the one who is Lord and Master of all the universe, and he came down and washed people's feet. That's Jesus. He's our example. And we are to be shepherds leading God's flock, going where they're supposed to follow, but we are to lead by example. And so if you're trying to rule over God's people rather than lead them by example, let me just tell you, hard times are coming when the sheep won't cooperate. Okay? You'll get discouraged. You'll give up because it won't work. And I think this again comes down, it is a behavior, but it comes down to motivation. If you approach ministry with the wrong attitudes at any level of ministry, with the wrong motivations, it will destroy you. That's why so many people try a little ministry and then they quit. Then they give up. But following a biblical pattern, you can experience a fruitful ministry. Using your gifts, your talents, whatever it is God made you to do, you can use it for his glory, and it'll be fruitful if you follow the biblical pattern. Now, ultimately, the final motivation of ministry must be Jesus. Because this is why we do what we do. We do it for Jesus. He's worthy. He gave everything for us. We're to give everything for him. Look at verse 4. Peter writes this. He says, "And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory." See, in ministry, you're going to face hard days. Whether you're the pastor of the church, or maybe you're a Bible study teacher and you worked hard all week to prepare for a class and no one showed up. That can happen. Maybe you're a preschool teacher and you've prepared a lesson for your kids and then they just won't cooperate with the lesson. Maybe you're a youth group leader and you've prepared a lesson for the kids and they won't cooperate for the lesson. Maybe you're a senior Bible study teacher and you prepare a lesson and they won't cooperate with the lesson. It can happen. Maybe you're the janitor and people keep tracking in dirt on your carpet. Whatever level you're serving in the church, I'm going to tell you, there'll be a day where things rub you wrong. There'll be a day where it's hard. It happens. A day where you face discouragement. See, in ministry, you will face those hard times. And that's why you have to always keep in mind the reason you're doing these things is for Jesus. You're doing it for Jesus. You know, when the sheep jump right back into the hole you just got them out of, you're doing it for Jesus. In fact, that's what Jesus told Peter. Remember Peter in John chapter 21? Jesus asked Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, Lord, you know I love you. Jesus' answer is, then feed my sheep. You love Jesus, you'll feed his sheep. You'll take care of his sheep, even when they're difficult. Because you're not doing it for the sheep, you're doing it because you love Jesus. Now, someday the Jesus, the chief shepherd, okay, he's the good shepherd. He is the shepherd, the overseer of the church. Someday he will appear in his glory, and he will be the one to evaluate your work and your goal. You want your goal, whatever ministry you're in, you want your goal to be to hear him say, well done. You're there to please him, not everybody else, not even yourself. And so if we serve in the ministry that he's called us to, not under compulsion, not for wealth, not for power, but because we are serving him, then Peter says we will receive a crown of glory from him that is a reward that will never fade away. It is unfading. Unfading. So Peter then addresses, I think, a different side of ministry. He's addressed the leadership of ministry, but now he's going to address a different side, and that's those who have to put up with their elders or pastors. I don't know. I know, any of you ever have the experience of having to put up with an ornery pastor? Okay. Nobody's raising their hand. Okay. It can happen. It can happen. So Peter's going to deal with that next. Look at verse 5. He says, just like this is the standard for leadership, verse 5, in the same way, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. All of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, because God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. See, there's a tendency to refer to those in charge of the church in the Bible as elders, and those in the church, the congregation, more as children. In fact, John in particular seems to use this analogy. Never confuse a person's physical age with their spiritual age. You can be 90 years old and still be a baby in Christ. Okay? And so I think what they're referring to is our spiritual age. And so we see this. But in general, those governing the church, those leading in the church, tend to be older. I mean, they tend to be senior citizens like me, right? You know, I got my senior discount last week. I had my first grandchild this week. So it tends to go that way. But we do see times where the elders of the church are young. An example of that would be Timothy, where Paul specifically says, don't let anyone disregard you just because of your youth. He is still the elder of the church. And so we need to get that concept in our mind that elder does not necessarily imply older in a biblical sense. It's more of a rank, a position within the church, that a position of authority. And I think our culture has lost this concept when we lost the concept of respecting people because of their age. Our society does not have a strong respect for age. In fact, we're in a society that worships youth and beauty. That's what our society worships. But God's word says that youth and beauty fade. You know, we're all getting older, guys. I mean, it fades. So what God wants us to do is respect age and wisdom. We also are in a society that idolizes rebellion. Okay, and I fear here I'm picking on American society a little bit. We idolize rebellion. That's probably because we were the rebels in the Revolutionary War. So, okay, if you go back to that. But God calls rebellion sin. In fact, every instruction Peter gives in this letter, as we've been going through it, goes against the grain of American culture. Think about it. Peter commands us to submit to our rulers. He says slaves are to submit to their masters. He says wives are to submit to their husbands, and now he's saying members of the church are to submit to their elders. That just rubs American culture the wrong way. All this submission to people in authority. For us, it's completely countercultural, which probably says how far our culture is from God. There's times when if you really read the Bible for what it says, it's almost shocking. And it's shocking because our culture is so far removed from what God said, and we don't even see it. We see other people sin, we don't see ours. So if you're not an elder, if you're not a leader in the church, then Peter would say you are to submit to those who are in humility. Now, this isn't necessarily easy. Pastors and church leaders aren't perfect. They can be wrong. They can make mistakes. Guys, I've made my share of mistakes. Let me just tell you. Just like everyone else. But it is also possible for those leading the church who have risked and sacrificed much for the church, it's possible that they might know more about the church and the church's needs than do those Christians who are weekend warriors. That's also possible. See, lots of people are a lot like football fans. You got any football fans out here today? I know I got at least one. Okay. See, there's a lot of people who are football fans, and they sit in their recliner watching the game, and they think it makes them an expert on what ought to be done. Okay. In fact, they tell me my grandfather, I didn't get to meet him, but they tell me he would sit with the TV on one ball game and the radio on another ball game, telling both of them what to do. See, people think they know more than the coach and the players who've devoted their life to the game while they're sitting on the comfort of their couch. And I have run into this dynamic in the church. So I'm going to tell you two stories today about submitting to the pastor. The first one I'll tell you is about a very famous and well-known pastor. I won't mention him by name because he's not the one who shared the story. It was actually his children's workers who shared the story about him. So, well, I won't mention names. But when he was younger, as a young pastor, his entire focus was on the preaching ministry of the church. And he's a great preacher, by the way. Everyone was to get people to come to church on Sunday so they could hear him preach. And the direction of his leadership would make you think that, the other ministries of the church, like children's ministry, were secondary. In fact, he probably saw it more as babysitting than ministry. Now, I find most people tend to think their area of ministry, wherever they serve, wherever they're gifted, that's the most important. I mean, we all do that. That's it's about me, it's most important. But the ladies in the children's ministry at this church, they wanted their department to get a larger share of the budget, more of a focus. They wanted to be able to reach more children, do better ministry with the children. And rather than everything going, as in their church, everything went to evangelism, advertisement, and worship service. I mean, that was the budget, and everything else was extra. And so they tried talking to the pastor about it, but he really didn't think the church had money for kids stuff. We don't have money for that kids stuff. D.L. Moody would have had a word about that, but anyway, he was into child evangelism. Now, this is the point, I think, when many a church worker would start to rebel. Sometimes they stir up trouble and they start a campaign against the pastor's decision. I've actually seen that happen, where they start campaigning and getting people on their side to force what they want, to get their way. Sometimes they'll divert their tithe to suit their own agenda. I've seen that too, where the person doesn't get what they want, so instead they start designating their gifts every week to that purpose. Or they just stop giving it all and then they spend their money on what they want rather than supporting the church. I've seen that happen. Others just quit. Hey, I didn't get my way, I'm out of here. I'm done with this. It's not done my way, I'm not helping. And I've encountered that as well. All of those are forms of rebellion in the church. And they always do a fair amount of harm to the ministry. Guys, for the church to be successful, we have to have unity. We have to be in this together. In fact, Jesus prayed for us. I just read it in John 17. He prayed for us. If you're a believer in Christ, Jesus prayed for you. And you know what he prayed for? He prayed that we would have unity. We would be one. Now, these particular ladies were wise enough to know they needed to submit to the pastor's leadership. And they didn't mean, there wasn't anything they could do about it. In fact, they did the most powerful thing they could do. They didn't rebel. They didn't, cause trouble. Instead, they began to pray. They began to pray. We've seen God answer prayers. He does that. They began to pray. And they prayed for God to give their pastor the wisdom and to give their pastor a heart for children's ministry and to lead their pastor to thing. And this is the testimony they were sharing. They said about 6 months later, the pastor came to them and said, the children have really been on my heart. What do we need to do to make our children's ministry more effective? See, they prayed. They took it to God, and God answered. And that is, by the way, a mega church today. I don't know if it was a mega church when this, happened, but it is today. Now, it really is this simple. God honors humility and he answers prayer. It's that simple. But I'll give you a second story, and this one actually is about me. I haven't always been a pastor. I've actually been pastoring for 19 and a half years. December will be my 20-year mark. But before that, I served in a variety of different positions in the church. I have been a children's worker. I told God I would never work with children, and so my very first position in the church was an assistant preschool teacher. Don't tell God what you're not going to do. Okay. I've been an usher. I've been a greeter. I've been the church janitor. I've been the AV guy. I've been a college group leader. I've been the leader of the evangelism team. I've done different things in the church. And probably, even a few other things. But I started at this when I was, pretty young. And I had to learn about submitting to the leadership of the church, even when I didn't agree with the direction they wanted to go. Guys, I've been on the other side of the coin. I've been the person sitting in the pew who had to listen to a pastor that maybe I didn't agree with, but this is where God put me, and this is where he was leading. And there was a point where I was a Sunday school superintendent, and they put me in charge of all the children, and youth, ages 0 to 18. That was my area. That's what I was supposed to be. And I tried to change things to make sure all the kids were safe. I tried to change things in order to make sure all the children were being taught biblically. Now, you wouldn't think that would be a big problem, right? You want your children's classes safe. You want your children to be learning the Bible. And what I found was that everyone wants someone to be in charge of the children's ministry so long as the children's workers can do whatever they want. Okay? They're all happy to have someone in charge, but they don't want to take, any instruction. And they're willing to serve as long as they don't have to follow directions. And so, long story short, this led to kind of a friction between myself and the youth leader. I was, the Sunday school superintendent responsible for all of it, but we had a teacher responsible for the youth class, and they didn't want an organized Bible study or a curriculum. Okay. Now, what they were doing is actually they had a group of teenagers. They would just walk in and talk about whatever they felt like that week, and whatever the teenagers wanted to talk about. And if you've been to my class, if ever you come to my Monday night Bible study, you'll know we'll spend an hour talking. That's no problem, but we still study the Bible. We still get to God's Word. That's an important part of why you're there. It's not just to chat. And so we would do that. And I wanted them to actually study a book of the Bible, actually learn from the Bible. My recommendation was the book of Proverbs. I wasn't necessarily stuck on that, but I thought it would be really good for the teenagers. And, it was a good book for me as a teenager to study the book of Proverbs. And that was kind of my plan. But they did not want to have a plan to do that. And so basically I was in that situation where the people under my leadership were not cooperating. And they were going to the pastor behind my back and saying, this is not what we want to do. And I was frustrated. You ever been there? You ever been middle management where you get it from both sides? Okay, I was frustrated. I was there. And I told God, if they won't cooperate, then I'm done with being a Sunday school superintendent. I'm just done with this. Nobody wants to cooperate. I'm not going to do it anymore. Now, I have learned not to give God ultimatums, because inevitably he will take you to the spiritual woodshed. Okay? And I've been to the spiritual woodshed more than once. It says in the Bible that God disciplines those he loves. He must love me a lot, because I have been in that spiritual woodshed. But I said to God, I said, you know what? I am finished with it. If they do not do this, if the pastor overrides me, I am done with this. And literally no sooner had that prayer come out of my mouth than the phone rang. Give you 3 guesses who it was. Yes, it was. It was the pastor. You know what he said? We're just going to reorganize this, and you won't have to worry about the youth. I'm going to take that out of your area. It won't be your problem. And they can just keep on doing what they've always done. I was frustrated. But see, God took me to that woodshed, and at that moment I had to make a decision. Was I going to rebel and quit the job God had given me to do because I was frustrated? Or was I going to continue in the ministry God had given me, continue ministering to those children? We had other classes beside that one class. We're talking about one class. We had children. I mean, was I going to continue working with them and do what God given me? And at the end of the day, that is what I did. I kept going. In fact, I'm convinced if I had rebelled against God then, I probably wouldn't be standing here today. I had to learn to submit to the leadership of the church, even when I didn't agree with them, to work through it. And I had a good, year and a half working with the kids while I was there. But see, we have to learn to humble ourselves, not rebel and exalt ourselves. Now, Peter gives us this instruction on how to deal with these hard times of ministry. Look at verse 6 and 7. He says this, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that he may exalt you at the proper time, casting all your cares on him, because he cares about you." We often like to quote verse 7. We say, cast all your cares on Jesus, he cares about you. We quote that a lot. And it's true, it's accurate. Jesus does care about you. You should cast all your cares upon him. But we often miss the context of what Peter's saying. Peter is actually talking in the context of ministry frustration. That's what this chapter is about. You young people, if you're having to put up with your elders, you submit to them, you humble yourselves, and you cast your cares on Jesus. If you're frustrated in ministry, those hard times that make you feel like the leadership of the church is unfair, or like they're not listening to you, or like they're leading you in a direction you don't like, what should you do with those hardships? You should humble yourself and you should cast your cares on Jesus. You humble yourself under God's mighty hand. Submit, because God's the one in control. Especially his church. If it's a sad day if you think God's not in control of the church. But I got news for you. He's sitting on the throne of heaven. He hasn't moved. He's in control. Humble yourself under his hand and trust him for the outcome. Do you feel like your potential is not being recognized? Humble yourself. Don't exalt yourself. Humble yourself. Submit yourself to God so God can see you and lift you up at the right time. Understand, self-promotion and pursuing your own agenda in the church will always end in God humbling you. God takes pride down. Always. The moment you're proud, the moment you exalt yourself, you're God's enemy, and he's taking you down. But humility and submission to God's will always ends in God lifting you up. Humble yourself in God's hands, and he'll lift you up at the right time. While you're humbling yourself, while you're waiting for God to work in your situation, you should cast all your cares on him. Whatever it is that's bugging you in life, whatever's causing you trouble, whatever's causing you pain, take it to Jesus. He can handle it. He can handle it. Pray and pour out your heart at his feet. No one cares more about you than he does. You know, Jesus went to the cross to die for you. You're not going to get a better deal than that. He loves you. Furthermore, no one cares more about the ministry of the church that you're doing than Jesus does. It's his church. He died for the church. He gave everything to create the church. So guess what? He cares about what you're doing in the church. And if no one else is noticing your hard work, he does. And the day's coming where he's the one you'll get to hear it from. You take all your cares, all your concerns to him, because he's the one who can and should handle them. It's one of the things that so impressed me about the ladies who were in the children's ministry at that other church. They had the wisdom to take their concerns to Jesus, and God handled it. Now, God might change your situation. If you take it to him, you pray, you say, God, this is what's frustrating me. This is what's difficult. He might change your situation. He might change the heart of your pastor. He might change the church leaders that you have. God can do that. But understand, he might also change your heart. He might change you. In fact, more often than not, I have found when I take something to God, the one he changes is me. The one he corrects is me. The one he starts shaping is me. I've also found sometimes when I take it to him, sometimes he gives new inspiration on how things can be done in a way that's far better than I ever had considered. Sometimes he opens a door. Sometimes it's out of that frustration. You know, the people over here saying this, and I'm thinking over here thinking that. And actually, Jesus is ready to take us to a door all the way over there. And we're all missing it because we're focused on our thing. And he takes us to something we've never considered. I've been there. I've been frustrated and angry in ministry because those over me weren't leading where I thought they should. And those under me weren't following where I thought God was leading. I've been there. And it's no fun. But I've also been there enough to learn that it's in that situation that God's working on me. Guys, if you're frustrated, if you're angry, if you're struggling, God's probably boiling out of you, refining in you, whatever it is that needs changed. Often he's working in us. He is more concerned with making you in the image of Christ than he is the structure of the church being perfect. Because he's going to make you like Jesus. That's his purpose. To conform us to the image of Christ. And he will keep us there until we are refined. See, that's something you can't run from God. Jonah found that out the hard way. You can't run from God. He will. If you try and you bypass the test, you just keep coming right back to it. It just keeps following you. The only way is through. You learn the lesson. I've seen God have me in the melting pot where he wants to burn something out of me. It's not fun, but it's needed. I've also seen God move in the hearts of others, changing them so we can move forward in unity. I've also seen God where he takes a frustrating situation and changes how we do ministry in a way I never thought or never expected. You know, maybe one such example as that is the pandemic. Anybody have any frustrations over how things worked in the pandemic? Okay, I can give you a list. Let me just tell you right now. It created a lot of frustrating experiences, especially for those of us in some form of leadership. Because I'm going to tell you, no matter what decision you make on how to deal with things, somebody's mad at you. Are we going to stay open or are we going to close? Are we going to wear masks or are we not going to wear masks? How are we going to do? No matter what you do, someone's not happy. But you know what? In that situation, we completely redid our online ministry. It forced us to do something that wasn't even on our radar. We weren't even thinking about how do we make videos, how do we do better sound, none of that was even on our focus was how do we get more people at church. I mean, that was before the pandemic. We were interested in physical people being here, and we're still interested in that. but that was our whole focus. The pandemic actually forced us for a good 6 months to think about how do we reach people through an entirely different format. completely out of the box. And out of that, we've gotten an online ministry that seems to be reaching people. That's kind of cool. You know, I think God had that planned all along, even when we didn't. So let your frustrations turn into good things. When you take it to God, He can use it. And so I think the bottom line is this. When we're facing hard times in ministry, you need to keep the right attitude. Peter's outlining the right attitude, which is one of doing things in humility and doing them for Jesus. Do it in humility and do it for Jesus. You do that ministry work because you love Jesus. If you're doing it for any other purpose besides Jesus, I'm going to tell you, it won't stand the test of time. It'll eventually crumble. And when those hard times and those frustrations come your way, they will take you away if you're not focused on Jesus. So cast all your cares on Him, because He does care for you, and He will lead you through.